It is the day after Memorial Day weekend and I have a fridge that is packed full of food. So I want to share with you what's in my fridge and do a few cleanup meals together so that way this stuff doesn't go to waste. Okay, so let's see what is in here. So I know for sure I have a few things in here that just need to be dealt with as is. So for example, I have some sourdough sandwich bread dough that needs to come out for its second rise, and then I'll bake this later today. So I'm gonna set this out and let it do its thing. These blueberries need to be used up pretty quickly or they're gonna go bad. So I'm gonna make blueberry barbecue sauce with this. And then I have some other things that I'm not entirely sure what I want to do with yet, but I'm gonna pull them out so that way I can assess what I have. So for sure, I have these eggs. These need to be used up, so I will set these aside so I can use them for something. I'm thinking maybe homemade pasta would be good to use these eggs for because that will preserve the eggs. I also have these herbs. So I like to wrap up the herbs and greens from my garden in damp cheesecloth so that way they stay fresh. So I have some dill and I think a little basil in here, so I'll set these out so I can use those. I slow cooked a whole chicken yesterday, so I also have a whole pot of broth to use up. So I'm thinking maybe, I know it's like 90 degrees out here right now, but I like soup all year. So I'm thinking maybe a little bit of soup with this broth will do. And then I also have these lacto-fermented peppers. So I will use these, maybe a green pepper or stuffed green pepper. Casserole would be good with these. Cabbage, celery, some carrots, some celery that looks like it might need to go into the composter. It's not looking very good. Half an onion. And then in the drawer here, I have the chicken that I slow cooked yesterday. There's also this beef from Costco, so I'm gonna use one of these, I think for that stuffed green pepper casserole, and then I'll throw the rest in the freezer. Tortillas, so tortillas are one thing that I do make from scratch pretty regularly, but not all of the time. So I make all the bread for my family, but I do have a pack of store-bought tortillas that I'm going to use up. Thinking with that chicken, we could probably just do some really simple tacos. And actually, now that I think about that, I have salsa. So definitely some simple tacos with chicken. Ooh, and some corn left over from Memorial Day weekend. So we can definitely do something with this. This cabbage is a little bit funky. It does have some browning on the outsides. So anytime you're preserving food, you want to make sure to get rid of any parts that are damaged, bruised, looking a little funky. You just don't want to use those. All the weird parts are taken off, and I'm simply just going to chop up this cabbage and core it. And you can chop it as thin as you want. I like mine pretty thin, my sauerkraut. So it doesn't really matter, to be honest with you. You should just chop it however you like it. I'm just going to put this in a little strainer and give it a rinse just to make sure everything is nice and clean. Anytime we are preserving food, we want to make sure that it is clean, free of dirt. So I'm just gonna rinse this off with cold water. So I wouldn't use hot water because I do want to make sure that the natural bacteria is on the cabbage because that's what's going to ferment it and turn it into sauerkraut. So just rinse it off in cold water. Then I'm just going to put this cabbage right into a bowl and I'm going to cover it with salt. So I've been experimenting with the amount of salt that I like to use on my sauerkraut. So the last time I think I did sauerkraut on YouTube, I used a little less salt. I think I'm gonna try a little bit more this time and see if I like the flavor better. It worked fine with, I think I used like, I forget, like 2 teaspoons of salt or something, but I wanted the flavor of just a little more salt on my sauerkraut. I put the salt in, now I'm just mixing it with my hands, and then I'll set it aside for 15 minutes. So we will get back to the sauerkraut in just a few. When I bring stuff in from my garden, I wash it immediately and then I wrap it in a damp, either paper towel or I like to use cheesecloth and put it in a plastic bag so that way it stays fresh. So these are already washed and ready to go, which makes things a lot easier when it comes time to use them. I'm just going to take the dill off of the stem. I still use the little tender parts of the new growth, but the long stem I tend to not like. So I will set those aside for the composter and the rest of it I will chop up. off of this celery. Some of it's looking a little old, but it's definitely usable. And then I have this little bag of carrots. So we're just gonna make a really simple soup with homemade chicken broth. In the 15 minutes that we were waiting for the cabbage, I was able to get the soup on the stove and finish the dressing. So now it is time to get back to the sauerkraut. I'm going to massage this for about 5 minutes until it's soft and then pack it in a jar. And we're just trying to get that liquid out because when we make sauerkraut, the brine is actually made with the water from the cabbage. So there's no added water in it. The salt extracts the water and then that's what we use for the brine. At first I thought I needed a big jar, but when you're making sauerkraut, you really want to pack the cabbage in there tightly. So I think this is a better size. So all I'm gonna do is just take the cabbage and put it right in the jar. And now this is looking really good. If you have room in your jar, you can pour the extra brine over it. But I actually think we are looking pretty good here. I don't think we need any extra brine because that's about right. So that was the whole head of cabbage with the brine from the cabbage. So I'm just gonna take my weight, place it right on top. Just make sure everything is submerged under the brine. And then place your pickle pipe right on there with your lid. And voila. That is how you make sauerkraut. So we'll let this sit at room temperature for about a week or so and test it, and then we will have sauerkraut. The soup and the stuffed pepper casserole will both be really good with rice. So I'm going to make a really big pot of rice. So that way I can add it to the soup when we want to eat it. I can add it to the stuffed pepper casserole, but also I'm going to freeze some of the cooked rice so that way I have easy ingredients for meals later. It's just as easy to make 20 servings of rice as it is one. So anytime I make rice, I like to make a little extra so that way I have easy ingredients for later. There's 12 cups of water in here. I'm gonna put in 6 cups of rice and then cook that all at once. Next up is pasta. So I wanna make sure to get the pasta made now because the dough has to sit for a little bit. And I am using this cookbook for the recipe. It's a pretty classic egg noodle recipe. So we will do this together and then we'll let the pasta dough sit aside and then roll it out in a little bit. I have a new pasta machine. It extracts it into like macaroni shaped noodles. So I haven't used it yet, but maybe we'll try it today. This is a really great cookbook if you don't have it. I'll leave a link for it in the description box below. So I'm just going, I've used it so many times, I turned right to the page. So this recipe calls for 2 cups of flour, 2 whole eggs, and then 6 egg yolks. I need to see how many eggs I have, and that will determine how many batches of pasta we can make, because I would like to use all of these up. I have 13 eggs. I need 16, which is a little annoying, but I have freeze-dried eggs in the pantry. So what I'll do is I will use the freeze-dried eggs for the whole eggs, and then I will use all of these eggs for the egg yolks, and that will work out just perfectly. If you don't have freeze-dried eggs, don't even worry about this. But if you do, 2 tablespoons of freeze-dried eggs is about 1 egg. So I'm going to put 8 in there. And that is about equal to, in this case, it would be 4 whole eggs. And then I'm going to add in equal parts water and let it sit while I prepare the other ingredients. If you don't have a freeze dryer, if you're not into freeze drying eggs, you would just use regular whole eggs. So that took about 30 to 45 seconds in the mixer. It takes almost no time at all. If you find that your dough isn't coming together, you can just add a tablespoon of water at a time until it does. And now I'm just gonna turn this out onto the counter, and I'm going to knead it by hand for about 1 to 2 minutes. I'm just wrapping this in plastic wrap and kind of shaping it into like an oblong cylindrical sort of shape, and then these sit out for 1 to 4 hours. So these are ready to go and to sit out, and we'll get back to the pasta in a little bit. I'm just going to brown this ground beef. And while it is starting to brown, I am going to chop up about a half an onion, maybe a whole onion, depending on what size. Whoops. Luckily I did that over the skillet because I just dropped it. These are lacto fermented peppers. So the process for this is pretty similar to the sauerkraut actually. It's just putting the vegetables in brine and letting it ferment. Now eating them raw offers a lot of probiotic nutrition, but the other point of fermenting vegetables is to preserve them. So I just have more than what I think we can finish raw, and I need to make room for stuff that's about to come out of my garden. So I'm going to cook these in the stuffed pepper casserole. They will lose the probiotic benefit because it'll die in the heat, but we still have delicious peppers that we can put in the casserole. I'm also adding in a drained jar of tomatoes. These are tomatoes that I canned last July. So I'm gonna put these right in here with the beef and the onion. I'll add a little bit of Italian seasoning if I can get it open. And I'll let this cook down. So the tomatoes add a lot of liquid. So I'm just turning up the heat to let it cook down a little bit. Then I'll add the peppers, rice, we'll top it with cheese and bake it until the cheese is melty and delicious. Okay, so that is looking good. And then I'm going to just take some of this rice that I cooked earlier. It's still nice and hot. I'm gonna throw it right in here. I'm not measuring anything for this at all. I'm just plopping it right in there until it looks good. I didn't have as much cheddar cheese as I thought, but I did have a lot of grated Parm in there, so I am gonna mix them together. I don't know if I use Parmesan cheese regularly on a stuffed pepper casserole. However, when you're doing a clean out meal challenge, you're just using whatever you have. So it's a great time to be creative. And who knows, maybe this will be better than just cheddar alone. It's getting really messy back here. So that's just part of clean out meals when you're batch cooking them in one day. Things get really messy, but what I like about that, you're cleaning out your fridge, you're getting rid of some ingredients. You might be making a mess, but you only have to make that mess one time. So it's one mess, one cleanup, and a bunch of meals. This green pepper casserole needs to go in the oven just until melted and the cheese starts to brown. Oh yeah, that looks delicious. Let's switch to blueberry barbecue sauce, and this will use up that pack of blueberries that I had that were just about to go bad. And I did have to switch to voiceover because my 3-year-old had her train whistle, so I'm just going to spare you. This recipe is available over at moonandmagnolia.com. I'll leave that link in the description box below. This is a super simple recipe for homemade barbecue sauce using blueberries, and you can use fresh, frozen, or home canned blueberries. So I'm just sauteing a half of an onion, and then once that is soft, I'm just adding in all of the ingredients. Chili powder, smoked paprika, a little bit of garlic, let that cook until it's aromatic, and then I just throw in apple cider vinegar, ketchup, 2 cups of blueberries, brown sugar, some bourbon, Worcestershire sauce, molasses, and a little bit of salt and pepper, and then I bring it to a boil and then let it simmer for about 30 minutes. With a 3-year-old in the house, we always have berries that are about to go bad, so it's a great way to use those up, and we made chicken wings with them and dipped it in the dressing that we made together earlier in this video, and it was delicious. So the skillet's already dirty from making the stuffed green pepper casserole, and those flavors lend themselves to a taco. So I'm not even going to clean this up. I'm just going to make the taco meat and filling right in here. I'm gonna keep this really simple. I'm just going to throw some of this chicken in here. I'm actually gonna save some of it for the soup too, so that'll use up all the chicken. And then I'm going to just throw in some salsa and seasonings and make just a really simple taco filling. Of course, you could use up extra onions that you have in the fridge or other vegetables, but I'm getting down to the bottom here, which is the goal. So I'm just gonna keep it simple. I might put in some of those fermented peppers because I didn't use all of them. That'll add a really nice flavor and tang to this too. And I also have this leftover corn. So this was from Memorial Day. I made some corn out back on the Blackstone, but we didn't eat it all. So I'm just gonna dump that right in there, pour some salsa over it, some seasonings, and we'll call that taco filling. And last but not least, let's wrap up this pasta. So I did decide to use my pasta extruder, and this was the first time I used it. So it didn't quite work, I think, the way it's supposed to. Those noodles were supposed to be a little more twisty than they were, but that was probably user error, not the machine. So all I'm doing is running the pasta dough through the machine and then tossing it in a little bit of flour. I extruded half of the pasta dough. I'll do the other half later. I'm running out of time. I still have to finish cleaning up. So I'll put this in a freezer bag and just throw it in the freezer so that way when we go to make it, probably tonight for dinner, it will be ready. One thing about homemade pasta is it can oxidize. So if you leave it in the fridge for too long, it will turn gray. You can still eat it, but no one wants gray pasta. So I'll put this in the freezer and we will have this for dinner tonight, and you can cook it straight from frozen. And then the other half of the pasta dough, I will extrude that after my child goes to bed. It's just too much to do when my child's awake. I served this with pesto that I made from our garden last summer. It was a basil walnut pesto. And then I also sauteed that zucchini from the garden, and it was so good. Oh yeah, and of course I topped it with a little extra Parmesan cheese. And then I have this beautiful loaf of sourdough sandwich bread that I made. I'm just waiting for this to cool off and get to room temperature so we can slice it and eat it. And then with the rest of the stuff, once it hits room temperature, I'll put it in the fridge. And after all that, it's been kind of a full day of cooking, but I'm not cooking for the rest of the week. And if we have too much of this stuff, if in a couple of days it looks like we can't get through it, I'll put it in the freezer and we'll have freezer meals too. I hope this video has inspired you to think of ways that you can clean out your pantry so you can get creative in the kitchen and save, hopefully, a ton of money. Thank you so much for stopping by Moon and Magnolia's YouTube channel, and I will see you again next time.